This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Roots and All in 2023. Happy New Year, Happy New You, happy whatever it is you're looking for this particular cycle around the sun. To bookend the winter break, I'm sort of picking up where we left off by talking about a way to mark the passing of the year and the seasons, and to ground yourself and your gardening endeavours in the natural patterns that govern them. My guest is Lia Leendertz, author of the annual The Almanac, a seasonal guide, and she starts by talking about the origins of her almanac.
The one that's come out now, the 2023 edition, is the 6th edition, so it started 6 years ago. And previous to starting writing the almanacs, I wrote only really about gardening and a bit about food and cooking. And so I was kind of searching around for a book idea. Basically, I'm a freelance garden writer, and so I was searching around for something that I could pitch to a publisher. And I had this idea in my head of doing a kind of round the year thing, which was a sort of plot to plate kind of thing or something like that. So I was kind of looking for a little hook for that and really sort of searching around for titles, coming at it from quite a sort of basic point of view. And I thought about the word month, and I sort of was like thinking, would that make a good title? And making something that's about each month and what's special in the garden and all of that about each month. And it didn't really sort of feel like enough. It was on month. It didn't kind of have a nice ring to it. And then came across the word almanac and thought, oh, that's a lovely word, actually, and a strange word, as you say. And kind of then started looking into what an almanac actually is, and then realized that rather than just stealing that word, I could actually make a real almanac, and that there was a kind of a gap for something. There are almanacs around that have been going for hundreds of years. So, it's really old. And there's the Old Moore's Almanac and the Old Farmer's Almanac in America, but they didn't quite seem to be doing what I wanted, which was to make something that was really sort of holdable and lovely to use, hardback, pretty, enjoyable to have around by your bedside or whatever. They've not got that same sort of feel to it, and sort of emphasis, particularly with the British one, the Old Moore's Almanac, on lots of predictions for the year ahead and things like that. And I thought there's so much interesting stuff to be said about what we know about the year ahead. And also, perhaps to fill in with folklore and stories and songs and things like that are seasonal. I don't really feel that there's a need for this sort of prediction stuff, which is obviously a hangover from it being a very old form of publication. So, yeah, I decided to make my own.
And you're right, a lovely thing it really is. I was lucky enough to get a copy. And it's interesting that you say about people having it on their bedside table. I've put mine on my desk and I'm going to refer back to it. But I suppose looking at it from a personal point of view, I don't necessarily find things that I have to delve back into easy. I have to make myself do it. And I'm guessing there are other people who are much more organised and do that just as a kind of natural thing. Do you have any thoughts about how people use it, and have you had any feedback? I'm just interested to know whether people do keep it to hand, whether they annotate it. How is it best used, in your opinion?
When I first sort of came up with the idea of it, obviously I sort of dreamed that people would use it throughout the year, and then was really very pleasantly surprised that people do tell me a lot on social media that they do. And it seems to have become, for quite a few people, kind of a bit of a ritual, a bit of a tradition in their lives. And I think that's so lovely to be able to kind of create something that has been taken into people's lives so much. So, and obviously, I egg them on social media as well, and kind of encourage them at the beginning of the month, like, it's time to sit yourself down with a cup of coffee and take a moment and think about this moment that we're in and where we are in the year, and really sort of ground yourself a little bit. But lots and lots of people do, and it's just, I don't know, a real privilege really as an author that they do that. In terms of annotating it, I don't quite know. I think some people do. I know that there was a little while ago, people started sending me that because the inside pages are all black and white. We have a different artist every year, and they're always black and white. And people started colouring in some of the illustrations, which was gorgeous, and sending me pictures of the illustrations. So people seem to use it in all sorts of different ways, which has been one of the lovely things about it. Right from the start, it kind of had a life of its own. People sort of seem to take it on, they take it in and make it part of their own rituals, part of their own traditions, and do their own thing with it. But yeah, very much people seem to keep it fairly nearby. I think actually it makes quite a good loo book, dare I say it? Like, I hate to say it, but the posh loo, the downstairs loo. It sort of seems to be something that if you've got it to hand, you pick up and look at, or it's, by the bedside table or on the kitchen shelf. And luckily, people do seem to come back to it.
Yeah, well, it is very, as you say, very attractive. It's a nice thing to have around you throughout the year. And you mentioned rituals. Obviously, having referring back to the book can become a ritual on a monthly or weekly or whatever basis. But there are also lots of older traditions and celebrations that you mention in the book, and they're obviously quite important to you to revive, for want of a better word, or to encourage people to engage with. And is there a purpose in us reconnecting to these rituals? How does it help us or benefit us in our gardening lives and general lives?
I think the majority of people anyway are quite divorced from the seasons a lot of the time, but not so much, of course, for gardeners. I mean, you just can't be a gardener and be unaware of the seasons. You're intricately connected in a way that I would say probably the majority of people aren't. So you've kind of already got this kind of head start on all of this stuff. But I do think also that within our year, we are sort of aware there are atmospheres to the different months that we are aware of, but I'm just almost kind of reminding people, really, and kind of reminding people of the difference. One of the things I think is great about where we live, it doesn't feel it right now in January, and it's been very wet and rainy and grim, but we do have this incredibly strong seasonality to our year. Every month is markedly different to the last, and each month only lasts, so if you don't like January, well, hang on, 30 odd days, and then another month will come around. And that some of those months are really strongly marked, like I think August and September are two of the, well, in fact, actually December to January, of course, the atmosphere of December and the atmosphere of January is so different. And then, like August to September is the other example that I use. You've got this kind of lazy, languid kind of times. And then September, you get this sort of brisk kind of new broom kind of feeling. You want to get on with new projects. And I suppose what I'm kind of trying to do is really remind people that there is something special about every month of the year. I'm a lover of summer and, always have been. And I think previous to this, I have spent my year kind of hankering for summer, really. And I think it's rather lovely to be able to try to find something beautiful about every month in the year and every moment in the year, even soggy January, which is hard. So I suppose it's about, living in the moment a bit more and kind of being more aware of the beauty of the changing of the seasons.
Yeah, it absolutely does do that. And as you say, there are some traditions that are done in months like horrible, drizzly January that are really surprising, and I didn't know about them. And it does give you sort of pause for celebration or to celebrate where you are in the year, even though that may not be the most glamorous or warm time of the year. And the other thing that you list in the book is your list of gardening jobs to do each month and the days that it would be good to carry out those jobs. And I wondered what you base those on.
So I do a kind of combination of two things, really. I give, what needs to be done in the garden this month. So you could just read it as a list of what to do in the garden. That is just based on, the best times for more generally for sowing. And, we all know that, we need to sow our chilies in January, February, and a little bit later get our tomatoes in and all of that sort of stuff. But then I also include dates for sowing by the phases of the moon. And it's sort of a bit of an experiment, really. It's not something that I necessarily stick to religiously at all. When I made the first almanac, I actually couldn't get a publisher for the first edition. So I crowdfunded the first almanac. And I never mentioned when I was doing this crowdfunding the idea of planting by the moon. And it was just really odd because obviously when you're crowdfunding, you get lots of feedback from people because you're asking them for money, basically. So lots of people are talking to you about it. And over again, people kept saying, I can't wait to get the planting by the moon phases. And I was like, oh, this is strange. People really want this. So I just put it in. And I think, lots of people are curious about planting by the moon. If you want to try it, the dates are there. If you think it's a load of nonsense, well, the dates can be ignored, but you've still got your kind of list of jobs to do this month anyway.
And do you do it yourself?
Well, I'm not really organized enough to kind of manage it, certainly not in the garden. And my gardening days, I think the trouble with it is if your gardening days are fairly limited anyway, you've got one day a week or whatever to dash out and do all the things that you need to do. I think it's actually quite hard to then time it in with the phases of the moon. But I have done, whenever I have tried it, it has felt like things were working perhaps better than they might otherwise, like when you've got a particularly good seed compost and your seedlings come up. It felt a bit like that, like things were working well, but it's so anecdotal that I can't quite even bring myself to say it. But, it's there for people if they want to try it. And I know lots of people are really curious about it. And then if not, then certainly just there's a list of gardening jobs to do each month.
Yeah, which is really useful. And I am going to try and do some of the moon stuff, particularly with relation to seed sowing, because I don't know, for some reason, I feel that I'm quite attracted to that side of it. So I will try, as you say. I'm not going to do it rigorously or scientifically, but it will just be interesting little experiment. And the other thing that you do in the Almanac, which is really a great thing, and I think you must change it every year, is you seem to have an underlying theme. So in the 2023 one, you've got the theme of the pond, which ties the months together. And have you used other natural features in previous almanacs? And if so, what have you kind of focused on?
Yeah, well, actually, the sort of more overriding theme of the 2023 one is the zodiac and solar system, because I've been saving it up for a couple of years, actually, because I knew that it was going to be a good year for spotting the bright planets. And so I sort of have concentrated on that. But yes, I always have a kind of nature feature. And I went for the pond for 2023, just because it's such a lovely little microcosm of the year and of how the year changes. But yes, in the past, nature-wise, I've done month by month in the hedgerow. That was a lovely one. And I really loved doing the beehive. Inside the beehive each month was amazing and actually really interesting to research, because they're just like little farmers, really. They're following the same kind of year as farmers. They're working hard through making hay while the sun shines, or making honey when the sun shines, and saving up and storing away and for winter, and then eking their way through winter, and then getting everything going again in spring. And it was really fascinating to kind of see that cycle within a beehive.
Going back to the sort of traditions and rituals that you document, it is very much about tying us into the natural cycles. And as you say, the zodiac, you've got the pond. They're all touchstones for us to realise that we're part of a bigger cycle. And I think sometimes there's this tendency towards nostalgia when we remember the past traditions. And I think we can also take a bit of a romantic view. And also I think that sometimes leads to feeling a bit sad about what we've lost. But I thought it was really in the true spirit of the Almanac that you balanced that out with a really poignant line. And that line was, your ancestors would be proud to see how far you have come, sipping a glass of cold wine and laughing in the sun. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about the context of that line and maybe expand on the sentiment behind it.
Yeah, I think that was sort of August, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember. It was one of the ways, I think, that I have this feeling that, as I was saying about September, there are lots of historical echoes between the way we do September now and the way that we have traditionally done September. It was always the kind of the end of the harvest, and there's lots and lots of traditions throughout different religions and all sorts of things that are about kind of accounting and bringing an end to the year and a beginning to the new year, and sort of measuring up what you've done and all of this sort of stuff. And also things like, our summer holidays and our Easter holidays, all are around kind of agricultural practices. And, I think the Easter holidays were originally created when they were, the long Easter holiday was so that children could help with the potato planting, because it was such a huge job. The very idea of, my kids being useful in that situation is quite hilarious. But anyway, that was, I think, the idea. So lots of our rhythm of our year is still kind of based on old agricultural stuff. We were all farmers or working for farmers for a very long time. And then I was looking at August and thinking, actually, it's one of the months where there's fewer old traditions. And one of the reasons would be that we were working very hard during that time. It would have been a very hard working time, coming up to the beginning of the harvest. And now it's not. Now it's a kind of lazy month, really, as lazy as they get, because we don't really give ourselves very much time to stop and take our ease. But, you have this lovely feeling in August, I think, of like, everything slows down. I think of like France, everyone in France apparently stops work for the month and goes to the south. And we don't do that, but there is a smaller scale of it because all the kids are off school. And so you're sending out emails and you're getting all these sort of out of office replies, and everything you're trying to do that involves other people sort of slows down, and you're kind of wading through treacle a little bit. So I was sort of, I think, within that thought, comparing our lives now, our Augusts now specifically, with Augusts of the past, and thinking, actually, I think our ancestors would have thought this was a good thing, that you're not actually out toiling in the fields, that you've reached this stage where you can sit back and enjoy the weather and enjoy August. So, we haven't done everything wrong.
Yeah, that is a very good thing to remind ourselves of, I think, sometimes. Thinking about the future years to come, is this your yearly job?
It is really, and that's really lovely, because I've been, a freelancer for, a lot of years, 20 odd years, and to have created myself an annual job is is quite a thing, and it's lovely actually. And I have now a real, in true Almanac fashion, I have a real rhythm to my working year, which is that from now, January, I am writing now for the next few months the 2024 Almanac. I have books all around me as we speak that are relating to the theme and and all the things that I'm planning for 2024. And then I get a little bit of a break over the summer when it's in, and other people are doing stuff to it, and the illustrator is working on it, and the designer is working on it, and all the many bouts of proofreading that it has to go through. And then September, it goes on sale, and I start sell up until Christmas, and then it all starts again. So it has got quite a nice kind of almanac-y rhythm to it.
It sounds perfect. So in the future, if you decided, I want my August, I want just a break from the almanac, and I am quite ignorant of them, to be honest. So I'm thinking maybe about Old Moor. I'm assuming Old Moors was originally somebody, and that kind of continued. What happens when they get passed on from one person to another? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't quite thought of that yet.
You need an almanac apprentice.
I do, don't I? I need to bring someone up through the ranks to train them up to do it for me. So yes, I sit back and do my August all year round, and I have various minions, doing it for me. But no, not quite there yet. But what I have started to do actually is to get more contributors. So the first few were very much just me writing it myself. And I've had some help all along, really, from Richard Barnard, who does the music every year. We choose folk songs between us according to the theme, and then he goes away. He's a composer, and he goes away and writes out the tunes and puts them on musical staves and all of that ready for us. For 2023, I had some help from Beth Al-Rakabi, who did the recipe development and testing for me of quite a lot of the recipes. And then I've got a couple of extras coming up for 2024. I've got a couple of other people helping me. Kate Bradbury, who you might have heard of, is going to be doing the nature section for me in 2024. So it's kind of nice to be starting to bring in some other voices. And because I think, fascinating as I might be, people might want to start hearing from other people eventually. So that's been a really nice process, being able to bring in people that I really like working with and that I really trust.
Thank you to Lia, and to those of you who contributed to the GoFundMe, who signed up to Patreon, who rated and reviewed the podcast and shared it with your network. You are all marvellous. If you haven't already listened to the last episode of 2022 with Rebecca Beattie, and you like this episode, it's well worth a listen, and I heartily recommend both the Almanac and Rebecca's book, The Wheel of the Year, as a great way to anchor your gardening practices into the seasons, the weather, and the cycles of life. Thanks for listening, and I'll leave you with Dr. Ian Bedford talking about winter in the veg garden.
Britain has officially had the warmest January to November on record this year. However, whether we feel it or not, winter has arrived, and with a few exceptions, the summer plants and deciduous trees are now at rest, leaving just the cold-loving plants to reassure us that there's still some level of activity within our gardens. And these plants will be happily growing in an environment where there's much less risk of being damaged by the leaf-munching and sap-sucking bugs, who should mostly be dormant and hidden away for the next 3 to 4 months, hoping that winter is not so severe that their hideaways fail to protect them from the lethal effects of the weather. But knowing that most plant bugs will be dormant throughout winter, and that exposure to ice and frost can be lethal to many, is actually quite useful to gardeners and growers, especially those who, on the one hand, wish to protect the wildlife in their gardens, but on the other hand, wish to successfully grow their own fruit and veg. Because winter provides us with an environmentally friendly opportunity to target the bugs that recurringly become pests on our homegrown produce each year, allowing us to significantly reduce their numbers in and around the places we'll be planting or sowing our food plants next season. And it simply involves knowing where these bugs will be likely to be overwintering. So for leaf and flea beetles, snails, sawfly and beam weevils, they'll be tucked away in their various life stages under pots and containers, or loose bricks, stones and logs, or amongst fallen leaves and garden litter, close to where we'll have been growing our crops. So these hideaways can all be searched through or raked up and removed. Whilst the overwintering stages of sap-sucking whitefly and aphids can often be found and removed on the leaves of winter vegetables and the surrounding weeds. Then the soil-dwelling pests, such as cabbage and carrot root fly, wireworms, cutworm, and those small black garden slugs, can all be dealt with by first removing old infested roots and then regularly hoeing to expose those that are overwintering within the ground to lethal frosts and hungry insectivorous birds. So, by just having a good search and clear up of the veg patch during winter, we should be a little less troubled by the garden bugs that, like us, look forward to eating our homegrown produce each year.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.